Hey, thank you very much. Yeah, and I would also like to say that I kind of beat you guys up a little bit on wanting to do this because the space that you're working in and the people that you're serving to me are so important. So I appreciate you guys being willing to move into this ZT thing that's going on, and everybody has a valid position here, which is good, and we'll get into that. So hopefully the internet ferries with me and I can share my screen without problems, and let's get into this. So you should be seeing slides, hopefully so. Like Maria said, as we're going through this, if there's questions, just ask, or we can wait till the end, whatever works for everybody. But we're going to talk about leveraging your existing cybersecurity stack in a zero trust architecture. Why is this really important? Well, ZT is a strategy. It's a big, bold strategy. It's changing the initiative around cybersecurity writ large. But the truth of the matter is, you as an organization shouldn't be barred from moving to zero trust because you're worried about affording a bunch of stuff from a bunch of vendors. You probably have a lot of what you would need to enable ZT. It's really just a matter of putting things in the right place and understanding how to leverage it correctly for that strategic position. So we'll get into that. We're going to talk about the reality of the landscape, and we're going to talk about specifically around small businesses, mid-sized business, large enterprise. There's a billion people out there running that racket. I'm not necessarily concerned about that. They're taking care of their problems on their own as best they can. I personally think that in the realm of a big, broad strategy like CT, if we don't take care of everybody, we haven't taken care of anybody. In the military, we used to say, if everything is a priority, nothing is. So we need to make sure we have a focus on this. The importance of a risk-based approach. And I'm not a cyber insurance person. I don't have actuarial tables. I'm talking about the reality of risks and how we apply controls to that. So that'll be something we'll chat about here as well. And then I'm going to give you some actionable steps and things to think about as you walk away from this, because I like action. Pontification is great. Thinking, strategizing is great. But at the end of the day, we got to do things. So let's follow along that line. So here's the truth, and this is specific to small business. I've cited all the resources down there at the bottom. And the funny thing is, when I went off and did this research, it wasn't the data that I've seen bouncing around so many publications and on the news and whatever else. It's actually much more specific when you really go look at the small business side of this equation. And for me, the only truth there is in any space, honestly, is data. The numbers matter. 46% of all breaches impact businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees. So that means nearly half of compromises impact businesses that have less than 1,000 people. It actually gets bigger as you get smaller, which is even more concerning. So small business is a viable attack vector, is a vertical that the bad guys are after. The organizations that go, well, why would someone target me? You shouldn't ask that question. You are viable. You are a valuable target for bad guys because you are connected to other systems. It might not be that they're after you. They just are looking for the connections and the access that you have. You're a viable, valuable target. 37% of companies hit by ransomware had fewer than 100 employees. That's pretty substantial. I mean, when you're thinking about ransomware, it's a big, big problem. Typically, you hear about enterprise stuff. Rackspace just had an issue with ransomware, big companies. But statistically speaking, data, numbers tell us that 37%, almost half, attack organizations that are that small. And this is not meant to be scary. This is not meant to freak you out. This is just to ground us in reality. So understand that this is not FUD. This is just truth. 87% of small businesses have customer data that could be compromised in an attack. Again, back to that point of small businesses, and I deal with this all the time. They'll say, well, I don't have anything that a bad guy would want. Do you have PII? Do you have PCI? Do you have connections? Do you have records? Do you have PII from some organization you're working with? You're correct in saying that your organization might not be the direct target, but you have valuable information that they can use for other operations. So know this. Scary fact in this whole thing is based on studies, 36%, better than 3 out of 10, of small businesses are not at all concerned about cyber attacks. Good Lord, help us. Why would you not be concerned about cyber attacks? How could you not be concerned about cyber attacks? This is going on everywhere. Unless you've been living under a rock and you've plugged your ears and picked out your eyeballs, you have to know that cyber attacks are a real thing, and you should be concerned. There's a difference between concerned and afraid. You should be concerned and aware of what's going on in cyberspace. And if you look at the tools that most organizations have, and this is again small businesses, guaranteed you pretty much probably have these things in place. Even if you look at your computer that you're using right now, most everybody's got antivirus. Most everybody has a firewall. If you're a Microsoft company, you've got a firewall whether you like it or not. Most organizations are still using a VPN. Giving you a point there to consider, VPNs were actually put into production back in 1993. Are you running your small business on software that you got in 1993 and keeping up with things today? No, hopefully not. You're moving into other things. Move off of the VPN. Password managers are very prevalent. If you saw LastPass just had an issue, it's happened before, but password managers are a valid solution in the space. Those are the top 4 cybersecurity tools that SMBs are adopting. But the thing is, that's not usually architected towards a ZT approach to the problem. And we're going to get into a little bit of that as well. Now, followed on to the data, the sort of statistical threat side of things. I mean, let's look at the reality of what that means for a small and mid-sized business. And this was interesting to me because you only see big numbers when you go off and do some of the research and look around at the news and those types of things. You have to really whittle it down to get to the data and the numbers that are specific for small businesses. The average small business cost is about $36,000 to $50,000 for a breach. Now, why is that important? Well, it's actually gets bigger follow on to that. This is for just dealing with the initial impact of the breach. And you might think, well, for a mid-sized organization or an enterprise, 50 grand, so what? For a small business, I'm a one-man shop. $50,000 to me, that could potentially wreck my whole year. So this is something to be aware of if you're a small business. It's a pretty much a floor. If something happens, you're looking at about a $36,000 to $50,000 cost just to stay operational, and that's at a minimum. SMBs are typically the weakest link in a chain of trust attack. What do we mean by a chain of trust? If I'm an adversary and I go against your organization and I find some system, some server, some access, and I leverage that to jump into a bigger company, I'm following along that chain of trust, and it's going to be bad for you. Well, what's going to happen is they're going to trace stuff back forensically from your partner, from the enterprise, et cetera. And you're going to be the one left holding the bag when they come asking how this happened. They're not going to come get me. I'm in some non-extradition country in Russia or China or whoever else or wherever else. It's not going to come back and get me. There's not a whole lot, if you haven't read the news, there's not a whole lot of bad guys that actually get picked up for breaking the law in cyberspace, unfortunately. So be aware that your organization, small or mid-size, small, is typically the one that causes or allows an infection within that chain of trust to occur. And typically as well, cyber criminals target vertical markets that let them take advantage of small or of common vulnerabilities among small businesses. If you go off and do some of the recon work, and I do this all the time, you'll notice that within specific verticals, especially small businesses, it's kind of the same configuration across all of those entities. You'll see the same ports open. You'll see the same accesses screwed up. You'll see the same misconfigurations. This is only good for the bad guys. And if we go back one slide and think about that, well, 36% of these organizations are saying they're not concerned. It's really good for the adversary. It's not good for the small business. And you have to do something different. If this space was meant security was great based on how much money you spend, how big you are, your operational capability, et cetera, none of these organizations would have been breached. You're talking about billions of dollars of investment within these companies to stay secure. And oh, by the way, all of them, let me say that one more time, all of them were fully compliant. Most of them were fully compliant right before the breach went down. Compliance does not equal security. So what do they need to do? They need to adjust their approach. They need to make sure that their strategy's in line and deal with the realities of compromise. Matter of fact, there's a couple of organizations I see on here, and I won't call them out because I don't like to put people out there like that. that were market leaders within a quarter of being the avenue of compromise, and they pushed that compromise out to their customers. If it was about money, if it was about capability, if it was about working with the government and being a member of InfraGard and all those other cool things that you hear enterprises do, none of this would have occurred. They've spent it, they've tried it, they've aligned on it. It didn't work for them. Your business, especially the small and mid-sized business, you can't afford to operate that way. You can't afford the breach outcome, and you can't afford to do the same things that they did and expect a different outcome. You've got to do something different. And we've got to leverage what we've got smarter, in line with the adversary's mindset, in line with the adversary's perspective, so that we can beat them at their own game. Now, look, the most important thing in any space, I would say, is to have a plan. There are some very basic steps that we can take to leverage our existing architecture. And the great thing is I don't have to talk really about tools here. I can talk about the plan, the strategy, the say that word 3 times 5, the operations around using these capabilities to solve this problem. So number one, define the roles and responsibilities. Who in your organization is going to be the person or persons who will do X when something occurs? In the military, we had a saying that you will never rise to the level of your expectations. You will fall to the level of your preparation and training. If you don't know who in your organization is going to respond, should an anomaly occur on a server, should an access cred be shared across something, should a new login take place, should a system get bricked, things will go wrong, and you don't want to be responding and trying to figure out who's in charge when there's already a fire on board the system. What to do with your information and systems. A lot of people store and keep data that they don't actually need for the purposes of business. And what does that do? It introduces risk. I deal with companies all the time where they'll say, well, we've got this stored over here, we've got this thing there, we're doing this stuff up in AWS, blah, 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 whatever. If you don't need it for the purposes of doing business, it's a liability. All it's doing is introducing risk. Find a way to either safely offload it, to store it, delete it, those types of things. Know what you're doing with your information and systems and have that be part of your plan. Who are you going to call when an incident occurs? MSPs are a very good thing for small businesses. Don't be a candy company that's also got a SOC. You're not going to be good at it. You can't be one toe in the water and do cybersecurity well. You need partners to help you do this. I don't know anything about making candy. I know a lot of stuff about cyber and SOC operations. Team up with organizations that can help you operationalize that capability. That time I actually said the word correctly. Make sure you know the laws and include information that's important to you based on those laws in your plans. Don't violate a law, a regulation, or a piece of compliance because you didn't pay attention to what's going on. And the reality of it is there are many different laws and many different requirements and many different compliance initiatives that are going to affect small and mid-sized business. If you're doing government work, you have this thing called CMMC that's coming down the pipe. Unfortunately, for a lot of you folks, you're also going to be getting mandates around enabling zero trust. If you're not familiar with that, the federal government has published a strategy on it. And I can tell you some inside baseball here, you're going to see some things coming down the pipe that will make your organization subscribe to the ZT strategy. And you should be able to let the organizations above you in that chain of trust know how you're enabling ZT with your technology stack. And then lastly, making sure that you define the activities that constitute a security incident. Again, if everything is a priority, nothing is. Within your organization, within your technology stack, within the capabilities that you have, what is an actual security incident? Is a weird login a security incident? That's going to take up a lot of your time responding to it. Is it a password reset? Again, a lot of problems there. Maybe MFA would solve that issue. If someone accesses a piece of data or a piece of data is manipulated, can you even see that? And if you do, is that your incident response plan? Where do you start? Again, this is all about having a plan before things go wrong, not during or after, because that $50,000 cost we were talking about gets exponentially larger if you ignore the realities and you don't have a plan in place. When the iceberg is in front of you, it's not the time to be arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Most organizations don't have a very good plan when you look at the small, mid-sized business space, especially the smaller they get. Typically, they have what I call the junk drawer for cyber. If you've got one of these, and I think everybody does in your house, you go to the junk drawer because you have a problem and you say, I need a tool or a thing to solve this problem. And there's stuff. There's a lighter that doesn't work. There's a marker that won't write. There's a tape measure that you can't pull out all the way. There's some lottery tickets from 1987. There's a weird rock in there. Like, I don't know why there's a rock inside of this, but if you've got kids, that's probably where it came from. There's screwdrivers that won't turn, or the ends are all jacked up or whatever else. And then there's some gum from the 90s that no one has chewed that's still in that space. And then, oh, by the way, there's at least 3 broken light bulbs that you're going to try and screw in to turn the light back on and figure out that it's already broke. This is what you see in cyber, as far as people will have some firewall stuff. They'll have some endpointy stuff. They'll have some antivirus things over here, but it's not part of that plan, that strategy. And if you align better on where you're trying to go, and you know what you need to do to stay ahead of the threat, you can take what you've got there and use it in a more operational way. Essentially, you're taking the junk drawer and you're not getting rid of stuff, because there might be some value in it, but you're figuring out which things work, which things will solve a problem, and which things fit into your plan to enable the end state that you're trying to get to. Key steps from this: determine your targeted security posture. Where do you want to be? Ultimately, organizations, I think, would like to get towards a state of zero trust. What we mean zero trust is removing trust relationships from within the computerized systems. Trust is a human emotion. Computers don't care if you trust each other or not. They just do what they're told. Remove trust. What are you trying to get to, and how will you get there? What is acceptable and what is not acceptable risk? If I have multi-factor authentication within my system and someone tries to turn it off, or they say, look, I don't want that push notification, are you willing to accept that risk? Maybe it's something that you just go, look, I can't step away from this. We have to have MFA. I put it in place. I paid for it. You're going to use it. If you don't use it, then you're not going to work here. If you're willing to accept that risk, be willing to accept that risk. However, understand that you, as the business owner or person in charge, have a viable right to say, look, I'm trying to protect this business from going under. You draw a paycheck from me. You should use the technology I'm putting in place. Don't poke holes in your firewall. You probably have a firewall that's configured with a couple of ports that you need. Everything else is not necessary. Figure out what a firewall is supposed to look like for operational purposes, and that's it. There's no reason to continually poke more holes and get into more trouble there. ZTNA is a good thing. Like I said, if you're on the VPN, VPNs came out in 93. You're not running 93 software to run the rest of your business. Why would you run 93 security software when the risk is that big? Move towards a better space. ZTNA can help you do that. Policy engines can integrate and operationalize the other technologies that you have in your stack, so that you don't have to poke holes in your firewall, and you can pipe a resource directly to where it's supposed to go. Don't accept risks that you don't have to. If you're using old technology, you're accepting risk just because of the fact that you're using old stuff. Explore your information systems and technology and find the gaps that expose your business to risk. You need to know what's going on there, and I mean this in totality. The best way to have a good plan is to understand the battle space, to know that you're on top of the hill and you're seeing what's going on around you, and then you begin to put your plan in place. It didn't work out well for Custer when he followed the folks up to Little Bighorn, and he just ran into the fray and things went wrong really, really fast. If he had approached the problem differently and stayed up on the hill and observed what was going on, he could have plotted, planned, and schemed and done something better. If you have information technology, we usually have a lot of disjointed systems. We have some Google Cloud over here. We have an Azure AD thing over there. We've got a firewall on everybody's endpoint. We have some application security stuff. If you don't know what those things are doing, then you don't know the operational value you're getting out of it, and you're going to leave gaps. If you leave gaps, that's only good for the adversary. As a red teamer and a former red teamer, I don't really do it too much anymore. I can tell you one of the greatest things that I looked for was when they weren't seeing what I was doing, because I was able to hide within some sort of failure of communication, misconfiguration, noise in the network, that type of thing. You need to see what's going on. I don't think anyone logically would want to go into a fight or battle space or highly technical environment blindfolded. It would be bad for you. That's not a good way to succeed. Visibility is key to enabling the outcomes you're trying to get to. Visibility is key to making sure that you remove the adversary's ability to be successful. All those tools and technologies are cool, but if you're not seeing what they're doing, they're probably not necessarily giving you the value that you want from them. These are things that you can look for if you have good visibility, if you know what's going on in the network and you have that context that's of value to you, right? So here, think about database activity. Is the database ever changed? Has anything weird shown up? Have we seen a new user logged in? Have we seen a modification of data within the tables and those types of things? If so, why is that occurring? And how did it get there? Understanding what's going on in the database. Account abuse. This is where MFA can come in. This is where biometrics can help, those types of things. This is also where you need to have a good ability to see what's going on and establish a baseline so you know what's different. If you see someone log in from somewhere that doesn't make sense, is that a risk? Is that a threat? Is it real? Is it fake? You need to be able to respond to that. User access. Bad guys love dumping hashes, cracking hashes, using passwords and moving through systems. If all of a sudden access starts going up and someone accesses things they didn't access before, or maybe they haven't accessed in years, that's an issue. You can get that from a whole bunch of different sources, a lot of telemetry available there, but to be able to put the picture together, you've got to have contextual understanding. It's not enough just to go, well, there's a weird login. You need to know why that occurred. It could just be someone's traveling. Maybe they travel, does that make sense? But they probably can't travel from Nokesville, Virginia to Kuala Lumpur in 6 minutes. There's probably something weird going on there. File changes, has someone upped permissions, lowered permissions, moved file, those types of things. FIM, those types of systems are also valuable here. Unexpected network behavior. Why is my bandwidth going up or down at midnight every night? Why is my bandwidth really cranking up on a Saturday morning when no one's in the office? Or am I connecting to things that are known to be compromised outside of my system? Why does everything I have on this particular machine talk to a .ru? Probably interesting. I should go look at that. Are ports being modified? This is a great indicator, I think, from people to understand that there's a real problem going on. Well, why is this weird thing connecting on RDP? Why does that not make any sense? Well, wait a minute. I've had a bunch of requests for someone trying to get into an FTP. That's a problem. We don't do FTP here. These are all indicators that something's going on. And if you see them one-off, maybe it's not the end of days. But if you start seeing these things popping up in a series of events across technology, and they're giving you those indicators in telemetry, it can indicate that there is a systemic issue, which is introducing exponential risk. And then users will often tell you something weird is taking place. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been doing stuff with companies and they'll say, well, Jan in accounting noticed that her login was being used for X. Well, why did that occur? Or someone will complain, like my login doesn't work. I'm only able to log in once and then I have to go change the password. Why is that taking place? If you don't have good understanding, good visibility, good context, you won't know that these things are taking place. You're seeing a puzzle, but you're only seeing the pieces. You're not even seeing that big picture to the right that you're trying to go, okay, that's what I'm working for. Your technologies can enable you to get there, but if you don't have the capability to understand what's going on and see the totality of things, you'll never get it right. If you're a small business, visibility, understanding context across all these things with all those technologies that you probably already have. Again, you probably got firewalls, you probably got user access, you probably got AD, you probably got multi-factor, you've got a bunch of those things. You have to take them and leverage them and put them into a stack and then see what's going on across all of them so that you can make a decision to solve a problem. In ZT, this is ZT lore. It's been around for a long time, ever since Kindervag launched this stuff forever ago. There's a 5-step process. If the 5-step process is done correctly using the technology that you have, you're getting towards a more zero trusty state. You may be further along in zero trust than you think you are currently, which is good. Define your protect surface. As an organization, what do you do for business? If things went to hell tomorrow, what would wreck your business? What's the protected data that you have to have? John used to call it regular data and radioactive. What's the radioactive stuff? That's the things that I can't allow to be compromised. I focus my efforts there to begin with. Map the transaction flows. Well, if I know where my protect surface is, what's going in and out? How do we get to that? How do we see that? How do we know where there's an indication of risk, indication of threat, problem in that space? I need to know what's going on and I need to understand the ins and outs. Again, you can go back to that firewall thing, ports, accesses, network continuity, weird domains, etc. That's a transaction. You're building a zero trust architecture. Honestly, by being on this webinar, if you're not doing ZT, you're enabling your first step to, I think, towards building a ZT architecture, because you're understanding what we're talking about in the context of zero trust. Begin to build that. Actually, there was a report published by IBM last year that said organizations that enable zero trust, statistically speaking, again, back to the love of numbers and reality, do better if a compromise does occur, because they are more segmented, they are more isolated. It's ability to stay afloat when the iceberg does hit the Titanic rather than sinking. Creating a zero trust policy. The policy needs to be applicable across the context of all of those tools and systems that you have. You've got all those things. You've got the junk drawer, right? The firewall, the access, the AD, the blah, 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 the endpoint, the antivirus. Being able to create a policy that sits in front of all that, and you can push it out and not interrupt your user's ability to do their job, is a great place to be. And policy is what you're going to use to enforce the controls that are enabled from all those systems and all those solutions. It's really hard to have a firewall help enable a strategy. A firewall's pretty much a packet broker. It's really hard to have AD and login take care of stuff with access within the network, as far as down to the network level. Use a policy engine. But the only way you get your policy engine right is by doing these other things. And then lastly, monitor and maintain that system. Monitor and maintain. You have to care and feed the beast. The bad guys want you to do things once and then be done with it and go, oh, thank God I've hit my zero trust stamp. I'm good. I don't have to worry about this anymore. I've got all this technology in space. That's wrong. If you're not monitoring and maintaining the accesses, the network, the continuity, the context in that space, you'll miss something. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And you're going to be continually taking that information to get better. Additionally, if you're continually monitoring and maintaining what's going on, you can polish things to get better even further on. You will notice misconfigurations. You will notice gaps in coverage. You will notice technology that's not providing you value, and you can get rid of that stuff and get something else that is actually solving the problem. And you can do this at the small business level without breaking the bank. We don't want to be like Sandra Bullock in that movie Bird Box. If you've never seen that, she spends like 2.5 hours running around with a blindfold on, basically going, what, where, huh? It's bad. She just doesn't know what's going on because she can't see. We don't want to be in that space where we don't know what's going on, because then we're going to run into stuff. The last thing you want in cyber is to be trucking along with all your tools and technologies going on about your day, and then you get ripped. Literally, the last speech I did before this New York one, I was on stage talking, and I see a guy hold up his phone, and all of a sudden from the stage, I can see him like take his hand and hit the table. His company got ripped for $750,000 on a phishing email, even though they had phishing training right before that, right before I got on stage. And now his people were dealing with it, responding to it. No one knew about it until that minute, and it was too late. So if you can't see what's going on, you don't have the ability to respond and deal with it in real time and know the context of that problem, it will get you. It's just, and he was a small business. He said flat out to me afterwards, he's like, this may end us. Pretty substantial. Visibility is power. We all want to see stuff. I mean, hell, I'm wearing glasses right now because my eyes aren't that great anymore, and I need to see what I'm doing. If you remember the movie The Matrix, before Neo became the one, he couldn't see the code. He couldn't see all the intricacies that were going on there. He was just kind of Keanu with a bunch of kung fu moves. Once he all of a sudden became the one, he could see everything. He literally could see down to the code level. He knew where the threats were coming from, and he had ability to respond to the two of them and stay ahead of them. You shoot bullets at Neo in the Matrix, he just stops the bullets because he sees them coming, and he has a capability to actually act. This is what you want. You don't want to be Bird Box. You want to be Matrix. And then if you think about the cost in this space, the technology that's needed, and all the many moving parts, think about it in terms of simplicity. Why is Google Maps so valuable? Why is Apple Maps valuable, if you like to use that? Why is Waze valuable? It's really simple. It takes the technology, GPS, mapping, the internet, your car, all that, and it puts it into a very clear picture and says, look, here's where you are, here's where you want to go, and I'm going to give you all the data and information you need so that you can get there. And oh, by the way, I'm going to keep telling you along the way These are better ways to do that thing because we're monitoring and maintaining that progress. Anyone can use this. It's not exceptionally, there's no exceptional cost to it. And it is leveraging what you've already got available to you to enable that strategic outcome, which is getting where you're going. So if you think about ZT, you think about the technology stack you have, the junk drawer, all those pieces and puzzle parts that you've got, you can put them together in line with this, approach the problem smarter. And once they become interoperable and you have good visibility, good context, good understanding, you can plot, plan, and scheme and get to where you're going and do it correctly. You also, with these types of approaches, understand where the end state is probably going to be. If you've ever driven with Google Maps or whatever, it'll tell you, I think you're going to get there in 5 hours and 43 minutes. It might take you 6. It might take you 5 hours and 30 minutes, but it gives you a bit of an understanding of what I should expect. If you have these types of things in place and you think about the simplicity, the value, the outcome, and then you align the technology to deliver along those lines, you'll kind of know where you're going and you can adjust and you'll have an understanding that you can tell other people, I think we're going to get to this end state by 2025. I think we're going to get there by 2027. That's okay. Most people like to know why we're doing something and then when we expect to get to that state. Technology, if used correctly, enables that approach. So I covered a lot of ground. I went through a whole bunch of strategic approaches. We talked about some of the technology in the space. We talked about some of the risks, the data, the reality, and the threat side of it. I hope that you found this valuable. I think that there's a way to approach this problem smarter, and there's no reason that every small business can't be enabling zero trust, just like an enterprise, without breaking the bank.
Awesome, Chase. Thank you so much. I encourage everyone to ask questions using the Q&A feature on Zoom. And just to get started, I have some questions that I prepared just to get the conversation going. And let's start with this. From a bad guy's perspective, what is the one thing that they wish these organizations, large, small, medium, MSPs, etc., wouldn't have? Is there something that you can pinpoint?
I think the biggest thing, and I'm speaking from a red teamer perspective, even at the national level, is they don't want you to have a good understanding of what's taking place. They want to look for spots to hide within the infrastructure. So the best thing for a bad guy is the dark recesses of the network. If I can find a nice warm corner within a server, a system, or whatever to continue to stay, we hear that term, establish a beachhead. That's where they want to sit. And if you can keep them, or if you can keep your transactions and your communications below the noise floor, the likelihood that they'll pick you up without having a good oversight visibility is very low. So the good bad guys, if that makes any sense, will stay quiet and you won't see them unless you know what to look for.
Great. You talked a little bit about visibility. So when you look at the zero trust strategy, let's say I don't have one, and is visibility the beginning? Is something that, what is the role of visibility in this? If I were to implement a zero trust plan and strategy in 2023.
So if you look at the publication from the DoD strategy that just came out recently, if you look at the Biden executive order, they talk a lot about visibility. When I created the Zero Trust Extended Ecosystem Framework, there's a pillar just for visibility and analytics. And the reason for that is, how can I possibly plot my strategy if I can't see what's going on? Like, how can I fly a plane if my eyes don't work? That's not a very safe way to operate a inherently dangerous environment. So visibility, understanding, knowledge, context, being able to figure out where threats are and then move your defenses around that is extremely critical. I personally think in the land of ZT, strategically speaking, visibility, observability, analytics is one of the first things that an organization should do, because then I know where I actually have issues that I can go fix. I could have the best firewall, the super coolest MFA in the world, the most amazing DLP. If I don't know where to put it, what good is it?
Beautiful, so good. And I think that leads us to a good question that we received, which is, how can Lumu help us with zero trust implementation? And I think I can talk a little bit about that, but basically, we have a free offering that you can take advantage of right now. It takes you 5 minutes to set up. It's very simple, and it gives you really just network level visibility, what's happening in your network in terms of threats, and it does so in real time. You can go to Lumo.io and get started if you'd like. Another question for Chase. What do you wish people would ask you about Zero Trust? So you do a lot of conferences, and it was hard to pin you down for this one, for example. What do you think people would ask you? What do you wish people would ask about Zero Trust? What is that most overlooked thing that just we don't pay attention to?
Well, I think there's two pieces of that. Number one, what I wish people would stop saying is that Zero Trust is a buzzword, because yeah, it's a buzzword, but you know what else used to be a buzzword? Seatbelts, penicillin, gravity at one time was a buzzword. So those things were game changers in their particular space because there was value to the ideas that they were proposing. That's the same thing you get with ZT. So understand that there's market buzz and that there's growth in the space. It's not a buzzword with bad buzz. It's a buzzword with good buzz. So that's number one. Number two, I wish organizations would understand that this doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. You don't have to go off and try and buy a 7-figure super amazing platform portfolio thing from whichever vendor can, make it available to you. Like I said in my talk here, you've got a lot of ZT capabilities. You have to figure out how to operationalize them and put them in play. Honestly, you shouldn't even be asking vendors to look at solutions until you understand where you are and what you've got going on.
Very good. And in speaking of these, let's say these organizations are open to it, they want to adopt it. What is that biggest point of resistance, right? Like that you get from customers normally? What is that? I want to do it, but I have a big block. What is that?
Usually with the small,
yeah.
with the small businesses, it's, oh my God, this is going to cost too much. This is an enterprise thing. Again, that's not real. That's not accurate. You can do this with, you could honestly do this with open source for a whole lot of this stuff if you needed to. So the reality of it is that the cost is dependent on your level of effort and your level of understanding. So that's one. The other thing is, you need someone in your organization who's going to lead this effort. Nothing gets done if no one is in charge. Nothing gets done if no one is actually leading the charge through the roadblocks that will come. So if you want to get into ZT, make sure you've got someone that understands that and that is willing to drive the football towards the end zone.
Yeah, I like that, and definitely not a spending contest, right? Look at Uber. Recently, we've seen that, and those organizations with more like privileged, I would say, not only access to technology, but access to talent to operate that technology. This is happening, right? So it's just more about knowing what to do, putting the right controls in place. Any thoughts on that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think we tell people all the time in ZT that one of the first tenets is accept compromise. Like the odds that you're not compromised in some way is pretty slim. You probably have something going on in a network. And if you don't think you do, you probably need to relook at stuff that's already there. And if that's the case, if you accept that reality, logically, the thing to do would be figure out, well, where that compromise is and start whittling away, because I can't build a secure infrastructure if I already have threats inside. So know that that's taking place and then start dealing with it from that particular perspective.
Awesome. Okay, next question. How can I leverage my existing security and networking infrastructure as part of a transition for CTNA?
So if you've got VPN, VPN was fine to kind of help us get past the pandemic, insanity. VPN connected us and kept us going. But VPNs are an old technology. ZTNA, most of the systems that are out there are policy engines that layer on top with connectivity capabilities that you don't have to rip apart your old network systems to put in place. So I'm literally on a ZTNA solution right now. I'm piped out to the resource in the cloud, but I'm not running a VPN. So if you're interested in ZTNA, there's a variety of methods and technologies that can enable that. That doesn't require you to gut your current network infrastructure and move to a ZTNA approach.
From our perspective, I think what we see customers doing is they have network metadata already. Their organization's producing this as we speak. What are you doing with that? Are you collecting, analyzing, going through just what's happening there and getting that intelligence and acting upon that, right? And hopefully you can do it with a technology like Lumo, etc., which, you have those actions mapped out for you or automated even better. So that's what we see on our side. Next question from Jonathan. If I can only purchase only specific CT solutions, only for identity, for example, with my CT budget, would it create more blind spots in my security stack?
If you're only going to buy one thing, is it going to create more blind spots? I would say potentially. Again, I'm not trying to push buying, because buying is whatever, but I think the reality of it is there's a lot of portfolio technologies in the space, especially APIs that interoperate well, that can give you additional insights. But logically speaking, anytime you just do one thing, there's always going to be something missing on the far end of that equation. So truthfully, I would say that that's a possibility. And I would encourage you to not try and buy an identity thing to enable ZT. That's an identity solution that helps with zero trust, but identity by itself is not a zero trust problem solver.
Very nice. That's all the questions that we have for today. We'll talk wait a minute or two just to see if anybody else wants to ask a question. In the meantime, I'll invite you to take a look at our 2023 cybersecurity predictions. We have 2 editions of these, one for MSPs, one for all business of all sizes. Chase, anything to say about just predictions in general that you want to comment? As I'm sure people, December 7th, who doesn't have at least a draft of a PowerPoint or slides in the works to just map out their strategy and their budget?
Yeah, I mean, my prediction is if you were sick of hearing about zero trust before, it's only going to get worse, because it's going to keep coming at you here as we continue to grow forward. I also think you will see an additional adoption of MSP services, because there's a lot of value there. And I think you'll also be able to tell very quickly the organizations that are changing their strategy and are doing better, and those that aren't. I like to call those that are the naysayers, the slow gazelles. You'll be the ones slowing down the lions that are coming after everybody. So
sure. Okay, great. For a lot more content like that, go to our blog. You'll see just the rest of our predictions. I have 2 more questions, Ken. When using CTNA to allow connection from remote home networks, what recommendations do you have for protecting endpoints from threats on those networks? Good question.
So, yeah, really good question. So one of the biggest things you can do, especially for Windows endpoints, is application allow list and block list. Most of your Microsoft applications have multiple means to invoke things that you probably don't need to allow. Like, there's no reason someone in finance should have PowerPoint running and it should invoke PowerShell. So if you're going to do ZTNA is going to pipe you where you need to go, and the policy engine will take care of that as well. But on the endpoints themselves, one of the most valuable things you can do, and the ransomware task force proved this, is to do application allow listing and block listing, so that those applications can't do things outside the bounds of what they need for the purposes of work. If you do an application block listing correctly, you've effectively rendered most ransomware moot. So do that.
Very good. Very good. One more. How zero trust works in IoT now? In IoT?
Yeah. So if we think about IoT, right? IoT is actually a really good place for ZT, because those systems, IoT systems, are actually pretty binary. Like a thermostat should only do thermostat things. Anything that's not a thermostat thing, shut it off, get rid of it, lock it down, those types of deals. So IoT is a great environment for ZT, because you can remove trusted relationships, and there's no humans to go, well, why did you take away my access? My thermostat doesn't care as long as I let it connect to where it needs to connect to. Everything else is a risk.
Beautiful. Okay. Yeah. From our perspective, if you have unified visibility of anything that's connected to the network, then you're one step ahead, right? you know what's going on, you can do something about it. Now, that's all the questions that we have. We appreciate your time, Chase, your preparation for this. You willing to do this with us. To all of you, almost 100 of you today, this morning, on this December morning, take some time to prepare, to learn. And if you have any feedback, feel free to let us know. Otherwise, I'll invite you again to our predictions. We also have just a new report that we launched on learned lessons from CISOs who have been experienced a data breach. This is not really a technical thing. This is about the human side of what happened inside of those SOCs, inside of those rooms, and how they recovered and what they wish they knew. So super full of insight. So we invite you to do that. And again, everybody, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.